Move to questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? And give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Given the unprecedented amount of violence in Indigenous communities following the government's withdrawal of the cashless debit card, what actions has the minister taken to restore order and protect vulnerable women and children? How much of the $250 million package for Central Australia announced by the minister in February 2023 has been spent, and on what?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for her question, and just to remind her that the cashless debit card is not in Central Australia and has never been in Central Australia.
Order.
The money that was allocated for Central Australia was $250 million. There is 38 unspent, and I met with the 38 million unspent, and I met with the leadership group in Central Australia just 2 weeks ago and spoke to them and what their priorities were in terms of the expenditure of that money. They are very keen to see resources go into young people, and they are also very keen to see resources go into some of the smaller communities around Central Australia. The investment of that $250 million is running very smoothly, and as I reported to the House several weeks ago, it has been spent in terms of youth services. When we first came into government, all the youth services were about to fall off a cliff. Well, it's not rubbish, Deputy. Leader. And we spent $20 million in terms of propping up those youth services. We've also invested into family violence centres. We've made major investments in health, particularly in relation to the diagnosis of things like fetal alcohol syndrome and other neurological issues. That is proving very, very resourceful. We've spoken just last week to the Northern Territory leader in relation to the rollout of particularly law and order in Central Australia. And finally, can I just say, through you, Mr Speaker, that the announcements that were made last week by the Prime Minister goes very much to the heart of $4 billion additional in terms of housing for the Northern Territory, which will have enormous roll-on effects in terms of child safety and child participation at school. The Minister for Education made a major investment in terms of education, a $1 billion commitment to getting the schools up to the Gonski standards in Northern Territory, which was going to take, by the way, to 2050, but will happen in the next year or two. And the other thing, of course, is that we are in very close liaison and contact with people.
Give the call to the honourable member for Dunkley.
After a decade of deliberate wage stagnation, how is the Albanese Labor government helping to get wages moving? What has been the response?
Call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and I thank the member for Dunkley for the question. And with that question about wages, the member for Dunkley, on her 5th day here, has now asked more questions about wages than the entire opposition this term. The entire opposition. And don't pretend you can care about cost of living if you want people's wages held back. We've now had three quarters of real wage growth in this country. People have now turned a corner, but it will take some time before they really feel they're getting in front, because those 3 quarters have followed a decade of wage stagnation, which was a deliberate design feature of how those opposite manage the economy.
Cease interjecting.
Today we've announced the government submission, the key contents of the government submission to the annual wage review, that low-paid workers in Australia should not be going backwards when compared with inflation. Now, it's not the first time there's been a discussion of this particular point. It's something that was raised during the election campaign, when the question was asked, should people on low wages be able to keep up with prices? When asked that question, those opposite the question, should people on low wages keep up with prices, first they said, well, that would be reckless. Then asked, should people on low wages be able to keep up with prices, then they said that would be dangerous. When this Prime Minister was asked, should people on low wages be able to keep up with prices, it was a one-word answer, absolutely. Absolutely. And as a result of that, people on the minimum wage in Australia are now earning $110 a week more than they were earning when we came to government. And soon, those same workers will get a tax cut of $827. For those workers, making sure, like for all Australians, under the Albanese Labor government, that they'll earn more and they'll keep more of what they earn. Now, the response wasn't only during the election campaign to those saying this was a bad idea. Only this morning, the member for New England was there describing it as window dressing. Window dressing for people on low wages. I'll tell you, I invite the member for New England to tell an early childhood worker that now earning $95 a week more is just window dressing. Tell them that getting a tax cut of $1,000 a year is just window dressing. Try telling a cleaner who now earns $100 a week more because of the approach this government's taken to the annual wage review that their pay rises are just window dressing, or their tax cut of more than $1,000 a year is just window dressing. Those opposite want people to work longer for less. We want people to earn more and keep more of what they earn.
Give a call. Order. The member for Gippsland. Give the call to the honourable member for Banks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. I refer to the disturbing trend of people posting videos to social media that glorify crime, including examples of thugs invading people's homes at night and terrified occupants being confronted and accosted by these criminals. Will the government support the Coalition's bill that creates Commonwealth criminal penalties for posting these videos and expands the powers of the eSafety Commissioner to deal with them? If not, is that because the government believes that no action needs to be taken by the Commonwealth?
The call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question on a very important issue, because, of course, the top priority of this government is keeping Australians safe. That includes two limbs. Firstly, in relation to law enforcement authorities within states and territories, but also obviously at a Commonwealth level, but also in terms of the online environment, what governments, industry, regulators and civil society do in order to keep Australians safe online. And on that point, I was very pleased on Friday to visit Riverbank Public School in my electorate, where the Alana and Madeline Foundation, thanks to $6 million allocated by this government, is able to roll out a suite of tools in order to equip young people to be aware for the online environment. But of course, the government shares concerns that young offenders are using social media to spruik their criminal activities online. And whilst we will consider the private member's bill introduced today, I want to be clear to the House about some of the powers that exist under the Online Safety Act, which came into force under those opposite when in government. The Online Safety Act already provides the eSafety Commissioner with powers to require the removal of material that would be refused classification in Australia, so RC, including material that promotes, incites or instructs people in crime or violence. Furthermore, there are long-standing provisions in the Telecommunications Act and in the Criminal Code, specifically that criminalises the use of a carriage service, including by devices such as computers or mobile phones, to post menacing, harassing or offensive content. Now, I do point out, Mr Speaker, the role of eSafety in this regard, and eSafety has established relationships and procedures with law enforcement agencies and social media platforms. And what this has done is enable a very efficient means of removing and referring concerning content to limit its spread and to protect victims. And I understand from the E-Safety Commissioner that the platforms are very responsive to law enforcement requests for their removal under this protocol. Mr. Speaker, the government recognises the need to ensure our online safety framework remains fit for purpose and is able to respond to new and emerging harms. And that's why we have brought forward the independent review of the Online Safety Act, although it's only been in force for a couple of years. We know that these new and emerging harms are occurring right now. Ms Delia Rickard is reporting to the government later this year, and we're undertaking that review. It will be a broad-ranging examination of the effectiveness of the Act, and it will consider the adequacy of the Commissioner's power to remove harmful material.
Call to the honourable member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government getting wages moving again in our economy, and what approaches have been rejected?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Corangamite for all of her hard work and for her great question as well. This Albanese Labor government's focus this week and every week is helping to ensure that people earn more and keep more of what they earn. This is the primary motivation behind the tax cuts which will come in for every taxpayer from the 1st of July, and it's the primary motivation behind the submission that Minister Burke and I will make to the Fair Work Commission on Thursday. We are the party of working people. We support Australians on the minimum wage. We know that wages growth is best when it's bottom-up and not just top-down, Mr Speaker. We back people who work hard and provide for their loved ones and just want to get ahead. This is our reason for being, Mr Speaker, to feed and fuel aspiration right up and down the income scale. Because not for us, the limiting and exclusive and elitist view that those opposite take about aspiration, that says you can only be aspirational in Australia if you've already made it. Now, Mr Speaker, we know that people are under pressure, and as the member for Swan was saying in her great contribution a moment ago, we know that cost of living pressures disproportionately impact people on the lowest incomes. And we know from the data that we'll get later in the week in the monthly CPI that people are still under cost of living pressure. We also know, Mr Speaker, that one of the most effective ways that we can deal with cost of living pressures in our economy and in our communities is to get wages moving again. But this is not the only way that we can go about it. We're rolling out tens of billions of dollars in cost of living relief. We've got the tax cuts for every taxpayer from the 1st of July. We see these important cost of living measures as in addition to, not instead of, a decent pay rise for Australia's minimum wage workers, Mr Speaker. Now, because, or partly because of our plan, we've got a trifecta at the moment of falling unemployment last week, moderating inflation. We've got real wages growth for the first time in years. And a big reason why we've got real wages growth is because of the approach that we have taken to the minimum wage, Mr Speaker. And our approach is very different to theirs, it must be said. For a decade, a deliberate design feature of their economic policy was to keep wages low. And that's why we had stagnant wages for the best part of a decade. That's why we had real wages falling 3.4% when we came to office. That's why wages growth on average under them was half what it is now under us, and it's why workers earning less than $45,000 didn't get a look in their Stage 3 tax cuts, Mr Speaker. We want people to earn more and keep more of what they earn. Those opposite want people working longer for less, and the difference is very, very clear, and you'll see it in our submission to the Fair Work Commission. We are here for working people, Mr Speaker. Those opposite never were and they never will be.
For order. Before I call the next question, I've got some acknowledgements I'd like to do. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is the Right Honourable Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand and UNDP Administrator. We have Melissa Park, the former member and minister, Jimmy Sullivan, a state member from Queensland, and I'd also like to welcome representatives from the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. On behalf of the House, welcome to you all. Give the call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. At the National Press Club on the 12th of October 2022, you said that you would work hard to ensure that there is as much transparency as possible, specifically around ministerial diaries. My Clean Up Politics Act would require publication of all ministerial diaries for all Australians to see. Why won't you support my Clean Up Politics Act?
Give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do thank the member for Kooyong for her question. Our government is, as she's indicated in the preamble to her question, completely committed to accountability, completely committed to integrity. That's why we have reformed the administrative review system. But when it comes to the suggestion that there should be some blanket categorisation under the Freedom of Information Act where any category of document is automatically available, we don't accept that position. There should be a series of exemptions which are to be considered by decision-makers when requests are made for the release of government documents. Those exemptions are set out in great detail in the Freedom of Information Act, and they have served Australia well and will continue to do so. I repeat, we are not in favour of any kind of blanket categorisation of documents that are automatically available.
Give the call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government tackling the cost of living pressures Australian families are facing, and what has been the response?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much to the member for that question. And indeed, taking action on cost of living is, of course, this government's #1 priority. We understand that people are under pressure and we're acting to provide relief.
Deakin.
We're doing that in 3 ways, Mr Speaker. One is getting costs down for families through policies like cheaper medicines, cheaper childcare, energy bill relief, fee-free TAFE, all of these measures. Secondly, we're getting wages up for workers. Wages up for workers, something that those opposite opposed, and they wanted, of course, low wages to be a key feature of the economic architecture. And the third, of course, is getting the budget onto a stronger foundation, producing, under this Treasurer, the first surplus in 15 years, a $100 billion turnaround in just 1 year. Now, after a decade of flat wages, it is a good thing that real wages have increased for 3 quarters in a row, 3 consecutive quarters of real wage growth. Now, those opposite, of course, will once again oppose any increase in the minimum wage. Well, that's not this government's position. This government's position is that people who are on the minimum wage shouldn't fall behind, and our submission this week will be consistent with that. When, during the election campaign, as the minister said, I was asked, should lower-paid workers keep up with the pace of inflation, I answered in a single word: absolutely. Absolutely. And what those opposite did was run a campaign for about 5 days, saying that the sky would fall in, the economy would collapse, whereas what we are actually seeing is real wages increase, inflation moderating at the same time, as unemployment, of course. They had other figures they hated last week when unemployment hit 3.7%. Now, it's not just about the wages that people earn that we want people to earn higher wages. We want people to keep more of what they earn. And that is what our tax cuts on July 1 will do. For people on those low minimum wages, $800 more in their pocket as a result of this government's policy. All 13.6 million of them, under those opposite, they would have got nothing. Now, this morning, Senator Hume, in a battle of the economic titans between Senator Hume and the member for Hume, she was out there this morning criticising us, saying the Labor government wants minimum wages to go higher as a cost of living measure. You bet we do.
Give the call to the member for Barker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Cafe owner Natalie Sagili in my electorate of Barker is at breaking point. She said, quote, "It's the worst it's been in my whole 7 years of running the business." The minister repeatedly promised to cut prices by $275 a year, but in fact energy bills for South Australian businesses are up $1,288. Why are Australian families facing higher prices and fewer choices because of this government's failed energy policy?
The member for Lingiari. The member for Lyons and the Treasurer will not interject before the minister speaks. It's the same rule for both sides. If that continues, people will leave the chamber. It is highly disorderly to interject when a member is not shown respect in asking a question, and equally before a minister speaks. If that continues, people will be warned and they'll leave. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Appreciate it, Mr Speaker. Thank you. I thank the honourable member for his question, and I would have thought the honourable member would have welcomed the announcement last week by the Australian Energy Regulator that the regulated price or the default market offer for small businesses in South Australia South Australia would fall by 8.2%, Mr Speaker. Fall by 8.2%. Now, that is welcome news. That is welcome news.
Order.
It's not always the way a default market offer goes, Mr Speaker, because there was a default market offer in 2022 which showed not a fall in energy prices for small businesses in South Australia, but a 5.7% increase for small businesses in South Australia. But to be fair to the honourable member, nobody knew. That was the effective policy of the opposition of the government of the day, to keep it secret, to change the law so that nobody knew. A pretty cunning plan, Mr Speaker. A very cunning plan by the member for Hume to deal with higher energy prices by keeping them secret. Now, we, on the other hand, have been working to put in place coal and gas caps to see prices come down, which the member for Barker and all his mates opposed, voted against, along with energy bill relief that was in the Treasurer's budget for families and small businesses. So they actually voted for higher prices, and they actually came into the parliament and argued for policies which would have stopped the 8.2% reduction in energy bills for South Australian small businesses. Now, I imagine, Mr Speaker, that we're going to have quite a debate about energy bills between now and the next election, quite a debate, because government policy is very important when it comes to energy bills.
The member for
government
Fairfax
policy can have an impact on energy bills. Like, for example, if a government chose to bring in the most expensive form of energy available, Mr Speaker.
What is that?
Which would be nuclear energy, Mr Speaker. Now, we've seen the opposition drop their small modular reactor policy. We saw the small modular reactor.
The member for Hume has interjected about 20 times so far during question time. So he's going to cease interjecting. He's had a very good go. So I can hear from the member for Wannon on a point of order.
Thanks, Speaker, and its relevance. Natalie wants to know when she's going to get her
No, the question wasn't that. The question was, why are Australians facing higher energy prices? Natalie was mentioned as part of the question. So that's the question, right? I'm dealing with the member for Wannon. That's the question. It's not correct to get up and just simply say what you'd like to say. So the minister is dealing with the end part of the question, and so he's obviously disagreeing with that part of the question, and he's going to answer it accordingly, I assume.
That's fair.
Well spotted, Mr Speaker. But, Mr Speaker, they've dropped their small modular reactor policy in the face of a 70% increase in the only small modular reactor under development in the world, NuScale, to 14 billion Australian for one nuclear reactor. So now they've gone with large nuclear reactor policy, 6 of them around the country. But the poster child for large nuclear reactors is Hinkley C in the United Kingdom, which has just come in at $86 billion Australian. $86 billion. That's their genius policy to put downward pressure on prices. The leader of the National Party was today on Sky News claiming that nuclear policy would see bills go down. At $86 billion a pop. $86 billion a pop for one reactor, and they want 6. Let's bring on the debate.
Order. When members on my left cease interjecting, we shall hear from the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government progressing the delivery of AUKUS submarines, and how does this compare to other approaches?
Give a call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for his question, acknowledge his service. On Friday, along with the US and the UK, the government announced the Sovereign Submarine Partnership, which will see a joint venture established between ASC and BAE to build Australia's future nuclear-powered submarines at the Osborne Naval Shipyard in Adelaide. Now, this will be one of the biggest industrial undertakings in our country's history. At its peak, we will see 4,000 to 5,000 people engaged on the construction of those submarines. And it is a unique arrangement which is designed to maximise the presence of ASC and, with it, the voice of the Australian government and, of course, the Australian people in this project. ASC has also been appointed to sustain submarines in Western Australia as part of the Submarine Rotational Force West. Now, through to the 2050s, it is expected that $30 billion will be spent on uplifting Australia's industrial base to enable this to happen. There is also a commitment of £2.4 billion over the next 10 years to expand the Rolls-Royce facility in Derby in the UK, which is where the nuclear reactors will be built for Australia's future submarines. And already there are parts being fabricated there which will find their way onto the very first of those submarines, which will be rolling off the production line at Osborne in the early 2040s. Now, this is a really positive announcement which is demonstrating once again that AUKUS is happening and progressing well. But as usual, those opposite cannot avoid playing politics. Now, to be clear, all the money that has been described over the course of the last few days is fully provided for in the allocation which was part of the original AUKUS announcement last year. This government is increasing defence spending to 2.4% of GDP over the course of the next 10 years. By contrast, the position of those opposite is to limit defence spending to 2.1% of GDP. So they cannot be taken seriously on the question of spending on defence when their position is to cut tens of billions of dollars from the defence budget. While they are spinning their wheels, we've got our shoulder to the wheel to deliver Australia's future nuclear-powered submarines to keep Australians safe.
Before I call the Leader of the Opposition, the member for Fisher is continually interjecting all throughout question time. He is now warned. Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister promised on 100 occasions to the Australian people before the election that he would cut power prices by $275. He's never mentioned that figure since. At the moment, 500 families a week are going on to energy hardship arrangements because they can't pay their bills, a nearly 60% increase on Labor's watch. Will the Prime Minister apologise to these struggling families?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. Of course, he was a part of a government that had 22 policies but didn't land one. 22 and didn't land one. That 4 gigawatts out, 1 gigawatt in. And indeed, he might want to talk to his deputy, who said this. The current energy crisis, she said, is not one that has been created since they arrived in power. That's what she had to say. That's what she had to say. And others, of course, have commented similarly about the reality, which is the mess that they left for us. They left Australia with the national energy grid built for the last century. They changed the law, as we heard earlier today, to hide the energy price hike before the election. They actually hid the energy price hike. They concealed from the public and the energy market construction delays and the hefty cost blowouts on the Snowy 2.0 project. In 2019, they promised to reduce wholesale electricity price to less than $70 per megawatt hour by the end of 2021. Instead, it was $286.
The Prime Minister will pause. The Prime Minister will pause. The Leader of the Opposition continually yelling at me has never happened before from the role of the Leader of the Opposition. It's got to stop. If the Leader of the Opposition wishes to take the point of order, he shall always receive the call. That is the appropriate way, rather than simply yelling at me. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
On a point of order, Mr Speaker, and the point of order is relevance. The Prime Minister was asked a very tight question. There are families who just can't work out how they pay their bills under this government at the moment, and we get this glib response from the Prime Minister. I ask whether it's your ruling that the Prime Minister is relevant to the question that he's been asked.
The point of order was raised on relevance. The Prime Minister at this stage is being relevant, but I'm going to make sure, given that he's provided context around the question, with halfway through, whilst he set the scene for why this situation is, because the question was, will he apologise to Australian families? That's the question. That's the question that he's answering. So I'm just going to ask him to be relevant for the remainder of his question.
Oh.
The Leader of the Opposition, a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. So that we're clear, is it your direction, is it your ruling—
Order. The Attorney-General is warned.
Mr Speaker, just so that we're clear, is it your ruling that the Prime Minister is in order and that he is relevant to the question
I've
that's
answered
been asked? That is your ruling?
I've answered that.
Okay.
And I've also asked the Prime Minister, given that he is answering the question about will he apologise to Australian families, which I appreciate members perhaps would like a yes-no answer, but under the standing orders, I don't have the powers under the standing orders to compel a minister or Prime Minister to answer the question. Just going to ensure that for the remainder of the answer that the Prime Minister is directly relevant to the question. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I understand the embarrassment of the Leader of the Opposition because he asked the question about energy prices and they voted against energy price relief. They voted against it. We brought to this parliament a $3 billion plan that was endorsed. I sat down and negotiated it through with the Liberal Premier of New South Wales, Dominic Perrottet, the Liberal Premiers of Tasmania as well, Jeremy Rockliff. Every Premier and Chief Minister supported the energy price relief plan. Those opposite voted for higher prices, and now they think the solution is the most expensive form of new energy. The most expensive form of new energy, where the Leader of the Opposition said there were just 4 little outstanding issues with regard to announcing the detail of nuclear: safety, disposal, cost and location. Apart from that, it's all fixed. But the shadow ministers come up with some other beauties as well. His 3 issues are technical feasibility, financial feasibility and community acceptability. Apart from that, it's all sweet. He can't find a single member who wants one of these nuclear reactors.
Order. Members on my right, cease ejecting. The member for O'Connor will cease ejecting. So I can hear from the member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. What actions is the Albanese Labor government taking to tackle vaping? Why is strong action urgently required, and I thank you for your efforts.
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, and I thank the member for Macarthur for his question and interest, because last week, Mr Speaker, I introduced legislation to this place that represents a precious opportunity for this parliament to do something meaningful and lasting for the health of young Australians. E-cigarettes and vapes were introduced to this country, Mr Speaker, as a therapeutic good to help hardened smokers kick the habit of cigarettes. It was not presented as a recreational product, and particularly not one that would be targeted and marketed to young Australians. But we now know, several years on, that is exactly what it is. Just look at the products, Mr Speaker, and look at where the vape stores set up to sell them. 9 out of 10 of them are within walking distance of our schools. What is undeniable now is that this is an insidious device from Big Tobacco to recruit a new generation to nicotine addiction. And the tragedy, Mr Speaker, is it's working. 1 in 6 high school students and 1 in 4 very young adults in this country are vaping. It is now the #1 behavioural issue in our schools. And even in and of itself, vaping is dangerous, ingesting 200 chemicals into young lungs, chemicals used to make weed killer, nail polish remover, chemicals used to embalm dead bodies. The Dental Association told us a couple of weeks ago, Mr Speaker, about an alarming rate of increase in black gum disease among 12 to 15-year-olds, which they connect to vaping. And we know it is a proven gateway to cigarettes, Mr Speaker. That is why we are so determined to stamp out this public health menace for our kids. We've already put in place new import restrictions and additional resources to the Border Force to increase their enforcement activity, and they are doing that. And the bill I introduced last week will outlaw the supply, the manufacture and the commercial possession of vapes in this country, other than for genuinely therapeutic reasons. And to those who say this amounts to prohibition, Mr Speaker, I say it is no more prohibition than was the regulation of codeine and pseudoephedrine in recent years. Mr Speaker, our extensive consultation around this bill showed health experts, parent groups and school community leaders expect decisive action from this parliament. And that's why so many of them would have been so troubled by the report that James Campbell wrote on the weekend, Mr Speaker, that the opposition is planning to entrench vaping and then milk it to fund their election promises, Mr Speaker. Milk it to fund election promises.
Will resume the seat. Order. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, I'm sorry, this minister is up to his usual tricks. The question was in fact commendably tightly drafted. There is no scope for him to be referring to the opposition, and he should be directed back to the terms of the question.
Order. Order. On the point of order, the Leader of the House.
The question also asks why is strong action urgently required, as well as the first part, which only dealt. Oh, sorry, teapot pose.
Order. The Leader of the House will resume his seat. On the point of order, the Manager.
Mr Speaker, if the standing orders are to be taken seriously, it is not sufficient to have particular pieces of code words that somehow allow ministers to range across a whole range of territory.
Order. Order. The Minister for Infrastructure, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. I have some sympathy for the Manager of Opposition Business because the question included actions urgently required. I think it is a bit of a stretch to completely have the answer framed around the opposition policy. So I'm just going to ask the Minister to return back to the question for his remaining 20 seconds.
Well, thank you, Speaker. Urgent action is required by this whole parliament, not action that would seek to balance the books on the basis of a highly addictive product so deliberately and obviously marketed at our kids.
Call to the member for Fudden.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Labor's energy policy is driving prices up and reliability down. The Australian Energy Market Operator revealed that gas generators might need to run on diesel to keep the power grid running and the lights on due to the looming catastrophic gas supply shortfall. This will add unnecessary costs to households and big users, and will hinder efforts to curtail carbon dioxide emissions. Why are Australian families facing higher prices and fewer choices because of this government's failed energy policies?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question, and he talked about the Australian Energy Regulator and Australian Energy Market Operators' gas statement of opportunities last week. I'm not sure he actually had read the gas statement of opportunities, because if he had, he might have framed the question differently, because every gas statement of opportunities since 2013 has warned of shortfalls. All of them. Every single one, every single year, warned of a shortfall from 2013 to 2022. The difference is last week's gas statement of opportunities made the point that actions of this government had seen that shortfall move out to the out years. The out years because of the gas code of conduct that's been put in place by this government. Now, there was a vote on the gas code of conduct in the other House, and the Greens moved the disallowance of the gas code of conduct, as is their wont. I didn't understand why, because the gas code of conduct actually requires new supply to be made domestic, not international, but the Greens moved that. They had support from Pauline Hanson's One Nation and Senator Babbitt from the Palmer United Party. Coalition of some interesting persuasions there, Mr Speaker, but they had that support. They also had Senator Canavan turn up and vote for that disallowance, and the rest of the Liberal Party and National Party stayed in their offices because they didn't want to support the gas code of conduct, Mr Speaker. The fact of the matter is the gas code of conduct, like other policies that we put in place, the Minister for Resources, the Minister for Industry, the Treasurer and I, with the Prime Minister, have actually been dealing with the situation of gas shortages that those opposite were warned about. They promised a gas-led recovery, and all they did was gaslight the Australian people for 9 years.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Blair.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Defence Industry. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting Australia's critical defence industrial base? Why is this so important after a decade of neglect?
Call to the Minister for Defence Industry and the Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Blair for his question and interest in matters of defence.
Order. Minister will continue.
For the last year, the government has been pursuing the largest defence export deal in history.
Just pause a moment, just to make sure that the recording and the sound broadcasting. Order. I'll just invite the Minister to continue.
For the last year, the government has been pursuing the largest defence export deal in the history of Australia. And I'm delighted to inform the House that last Thursday the German Parliament approved the acquisition of 100 Boxer heavy weapon carriers to be supplied by the Australian government and made by Rheinmetall Australia in Ipswich, in the Speaker's own electorate. As a result, I have signed a government-to-government agreement with my German counterpart to deliver these vehicles. And as I said, the biggest defence export deal ever, worth over $1 billion, supporting 600 direct jobs at Rheinmetall and hundreds in a supply chain that involves 300 local companies. And it's not just the dollars, it's about us exporting very advanced military vehicles manufactured here. This is what we mean by a future made in Australia. Now, this export deal didn't happen by itself. It was the result of 12 months of hard work from a team all the way up to the Prime Minister, who advocated hard for this in Berlin and signed an in-principle agreement. It required a defence team engaging with their German counterparts at speed, and it required Rheinmetall and their hard-working staff to step up enthusiastically. But not everyone backed the deal, Mr Speaker, I'm ashamed to say. Surely not. The Shadow Defence Minister in July took real glee in claiming that the export deal was dead. Well, unlike him, those on this side believe in Aussie industry. We believe in 100,000+ defence industry workers. We believe in a future made in Australia and will fight for it every day. And this is important due to the decade of neglect under the Coalition. A decade of neglect where one Coalition Defence Minister said he wouldn't trust South Australian workers to build a canoe. A decade of neglect where a Coalition Cabinet that the Opposition Leader was a member of tried to send the submarine contract to Japan. Now, it's vital we support the Australian defence industry base because it's a fundamental input to the ADF. and that's why the government has released a new defence industry development strategy, and we're backing it up with a $41 billion increase in the defence budget to deliver the capabilities the ADF needs. The Australian Defence Force needs all our support, and the Albanese Labor government believes in a future made in Australia. Those opposite just want to talk Australian industry down while they cut the defence budget.
Give the call to the honourable member for Fowler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Many young people in Fowler are not just experiencing the cost of living crisis, but are also facing an increased mountain of debt with their education. The majority in this chamber have reaped the benefits of a free education. It's a very different reality today for our young people pursuing higher education with their help debt being counted against them. When will the government take action to freeze this debt to provide immediate relief for young people, especially those struggling in Western Sydney?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Fowler for her question. She has the privilege of representing one of the best places in Australia, if not the world. Just happens to be the place that I grew up in, Cabramatta. And also represent my mum and dad who still live there.
Order. The member for Fadden will cease interjecting.
I went to Cabramatta Primary School and I went to Canley Vale High School, and I was the first person in my family to finish Year 10. I remember a lot of the kids that I went to school with never got a chance to go to university. For them, it seemed like it was somewhere else for someone else, just too far away. And that's why that Fairfield Connect University Hub that the Minister for Climate Change and Energy and I opened in Fairfield the other day is really important. It's about breaking down that invisible barrier that helps kids from the communities that we represent in Western Sydney to get a crack at university. And I can anticipate your point of order that says, what are we doing about HECS and HELP? Am I right?
If you resume your seat, we may even hear the point of order. So the member for Fowler on a point of order.
Relevant, Speaker. It's when will the government take action to freeze the HECS debt, especially for those struggling in Western Sydney?
The minister's had 1 minute 10 and provided some context, but he'll have to return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
He has the call.
Like a modern-day Nostradamus, I thought you were going to take me there. Mr Speaker,
Order.
How did I get it? How did I get it? Are you smiling?
Order.
Are you smiling? You're smiling.
Order.
I've never seen you so happy.
The minister will.
Come on,
the minister
smile
will
a bit
return.
more.
The minister
Smile
will return to the
more.
question. The minister will return to the question, and the leader of the opposition will pause.
Now he's angry.
Order.
Like a try-hard Tony Abbott, all the anger without the onion.
No.
Come on, hurry up.
The minister will pause. The minister will pause. The leader of the opposition. The leader of the opposition will pause. The member has asked the question. Appreciate the back and forth that's happening at the front table, but I'm asking you to refer to the member for Fowler's question.
Back to the best place in Australia, Fowler. We want to make sure that more Australians get a crack at going to university. That's what the Universities Accord is all about. One of the set of recommendations in that report, as I said in answer to the member for Ryan's question last week, was about how we make HECS, or what we now call HELP, fairer and simpler. We're considering those recommendations at the moment. We'll respond in the next few months. But what that report told us is that we need more people to be able to get a crack at going to TAFE or to university in the years ahead. More jobs will require more skills. In the days when we were growing up, when Hawke and Keating were Prime Ministers, the percentage of people who finished school jumped from 40% to almost 80%. And that was nation-changing stuff. That was big economic reform that created businesses and jobs that otherwise wouldn't have existed. And what the Accord says is in the decades ahead, we won't just need 80% of people to finish school. We'll need 80% of people to be able to finish school and then go on to TAFE or to university. And a lot of those people grow up in Fowler and Blaxland and McMahon in the western suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane and in regional Australia too. And if we don't make sure that we give them a crack at going to university, we're not going to have the economic firepower to be everything this country can be in the years ahead. And at its core, that's what the Accord is about.
Call to the honourable member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. How is the Albanese government helping aged care workers earn more and keep more of what they earn? And what impact is that having on the quality of care that older Australians are receiving?
The call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
I thank the member for Jagga Jagga for her question. I know she cares very deeply about ensuring the hard-working carers in her electorate are valued and are able to provide a higher standard of care for older Australians. And that's why the Albanese government wants all workers, including aged care workers, to earn more and to keep more of what they earn. Because strong, sustainable wage growth is how Australians overcome cost of living challenges, not what causes them. That's why we backed aged care workers in their fight for better wages at the Fair Work Commission, and we delivered a 15% increase to the award wage minimum for 250,000 workers across this country. An $11.3 billion investment in people who dedicate their working lives to caring for our most vulnerable people. And under the Albanese government, personal care workers are now taking home an additional $141 per week, or $7,000 a year. Excellent. Registered nurses are now taking home an additional $196 per week, or just shy of $10,000 per year. Fantastic. That extra money coming in every week is changing the lives of the workers and the people that they care for. Manisha is an aged care worker at Arunga Uniting in Ermington in the member for Bennelong's electorate. And when she first started working in aged care, she was an assistant in nursing, an incredibly valued position. And while working as an assistant in nursing, Manisha studied a Bachelor's of Nursing to become a registered nurse. And Manisha told me that the aged care pay rise has empowered her now to plan for more for her future. She now wants to get her master's and continue her career, her whole life, working in aged care. And that is what happens when you invest in workers and value their skills and their experience. Our investment in workers like Manisha is not just changing her life, it is changing the lives of the older people that she cares for. We have just published the latest 24/7 nursing data for February, and today I can share that the number of registered nurses in aged care in Australia has again increased. Wow. There is now a registered nurse in aged care on site 98.79% of the time in Australia. 90.02% of aged care homes now have a registered nurse on site 24/7, with the majority of the remaining homes very close to 24/7 RN coverage. That is an achievement that those opposite didn't even dream of attempting in government, let alone legislating for it, let alone budgeting for it. And under the Albanese government, older people are receiving an additional 2.16 million minutes of care every single day. Every single day. There has been a reduction in the number of pressure injuries, in the number of physical restraints, in significant unplanned weight loss, in falls, in polypharmacy and in the use of antipsychotics in aged care.
Call to the honourable member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. The minister hailed Labor's new family car and ute tax as bringing Australia in line with vehicle standards in the United States by 2028. Now the Biden administration has abandoned its initial policy amid fears that billions of dollars in new fines on automakers would increase the price of new cars for families. Why are Australian families facing higher prices and fewer choices because of this government's failed energy policies?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question. There was a lot in there, but I'm just going to focus on the new vehicle efficiency standards, because on this side of the House we've had enough of Australian motorists being second-class citizens and being the dumping ground for motoring companies to send cars to Australia they're not allowed to send to other countries. Now, what the Minister for Transport and I have been doing is a very similar process to that taken by the previous government when they thought about doing this, Mr Speaker, putting out a preferred model and consulting on it. And that's what we've been doing, and that consultation is very close to a conclusion, and we'll have more to say. And of course we've looked at the recent developments in the United States as part of that. But the difference is
Order.
When the member for Bradfield consulted on his preferred model, he got rolled, and they rolled over the policy. And they were happy to have Australian motorists treated at the back of the queue for the world's car companies. We are not. We are not. We think it's about time Australia had similar standards to the rest of the world, and we got out of the G2 of Australia and Russia as the only two countries without efficiency standards.
Give the call to the honourable member for Macnamara.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How will the Albanese Labor government's tax cuts help tradies build the homes Australia needs, and what is standing in the way of the government's broad housing agenda?
Call to the Minister for Small Business, the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I do want to thank the member for Macnamara. He understands how important our tradies are to build our homes that we need under our broad housing agenda. Mr Speaker, he's also been very supportive of developments, particularly in Victoria around Melbourne, that will get more people into our homes sooner. Mr Speaker, our hard-working tradies do deserve a tax cut, and thanks to the Labor government they'll be getting a tax cut on the 1st of July, Mr Speaker, which means that they will be able to keep more of what they earn. But, Mr Speaker, we're also supporting more Australians to start their careers in construction. Last year alone, we had 24,200 students enrolled in the construction sector through Labor's fee-free TAFE, adding to the 240,000 people that were already training in the construction sector. We've added, of course, thanks to the work of the Minister for Skills and Training over here, a further 300,000 free TAFE places from 2024 to 26 in priority areas. That includes construction, Mr Speaker, because we understand how important that is. So we're investing in our tradies through training Australians and bringing in skilled workers, Mr Speaker. We need these investments so that we can build the homes that Australians need. We have committed now more than $25 billion over the next decade in additional investments into housing. Unlike those opposite, we're working closely with all levels of government to achieve our 1.2 ambitious million homes target, Mr Speaker. We're supporting the states and territories through the $3 billion new homes bonus. We're supporting them with $500 million housing support program that the Minister for Infrastructure and I will be announcing in the coming weeks, through, of course, the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund that will fund and build 30,000 social and affordable homes over the next decade. There's, of course, the Housing Accord, a further 10,000 homes to be matched by states and territories. But, Mr Speaker, there are obstacles to what we are trying to achieve in housing. There's obstacles, and sadly they sit over there, Mr Speaker. They keep voting against more housing for Australians. Particularly, Mr Speaker, they of course voted against the Housing Australia Future Fund. The Greens over there did hold it up for a further 6 months. But what I would say to those opposite is we now have Help to Buy going into the Senate, and those opposite know that this is targeted at supply with a 40% equity scheme, Mr Speaker. And those opposite should be supporting it. They can't go out and say we have housing challenges and continue to come in here and vote against measures that will add to supply, Mr Speaker. They continually come in here and they continually vote against it. But, Mr Speaker, they need to think about the people. They need to think about people like MR that I met on Friday when I was in Paran and we opened 434 new social homes with the Victorian government. MR said how much social housing has changed her lives. We want to do more of this for people like MR, and those opposite should be supporting it, not voting against it.
Call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Speaker, my question is to the Resources Minister. Labor promised to strengthen environment laws and backed the Uluru Statement. But after big gas corporation Santos wrote to you and complained about traditional owners winning court cases, Labor is ramming a bill through the House that gives the Resources Minister the power to override the federal court decisions and remove existing protections. Why is Labor working with the climate-denying Liberals to fast-track climate-destroying gas projects and weaken the voices of First Nations traditional owners?
Order. Give the call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thanks so much, Mr Speaker, and I refer to the question from the member for Melbourne. It might be a surprise to the Greens political party that the resources industry does from time to time write letter to the Minister for Resources. Sorry, it was ministers over on that side, of course. There's only one resources minister in this government. The government has been really very consistent in its position that it would work with stakeholders to further strengthen the bill to which you have referred, to give everyone confidence about the intent of the changes. The Senate inquiry has, while recommending passage of the bill, has illustrated there is scope for additional protections which we are pursuing, and those amendments were discussed later today. What I have observed in my time on working on this offshore safety legislation and other matters is that it's become increasingly clear to me that the Greens political party simply want to continue the situation where there is an absolute lawyers' picnic over approvals going through the courts of various projects. They would prefer to see millions of dollars get spent in courts delaying the rights of Indigenous people to have their say. What we are doing right now is making sure consultation provisions are indeed improved, and so they're more clear for everyone concerned, whether it be traditional owners or the wider community that hosts these projects or have concerns over them, no matter where they're from. This is the point of the consultation that we're undertaking right now. It is very open, it's very public, we've extended it, many people have submitted to it. The Senate inquiry last week indeed revealed that traditional owners, as well as the wider community, as well as, of course, proponents, are frustrated by the lack of certainty around the consultation provisions as they now stand. And I, for one, and this government, would rather pursue reform to that to make it more certain through legislation rather than let this endless lawyers' picnic continue. So you may shake your head, the member for Melbourne, but the truth is the Greens political party would prefer lawyers to get a lot of money pursuing this through the courts and wasting everybody's time, wasting the court's time, I might add, rather than letting environmental regulators look over approvals and see them done properly and see consultation, make sure that consultation is required to be face-to-face, has guardrails around it, introduces certainty for everybody, not just bits and pieces of who has interest, who has money to go to the court, who has access, like millionaires that go to courts, as you well know, also publicly funded bodies that get donations from very rich international trusts that go to fund these processes through the courts. So I, for one, want to end this lawyers' picnic. I want to end the practice where we see dodgy academic people going through the courts to support Greens. Well, they are dodgy. I can hear the interjection. Apologies, Mr Speaker.
Order.
We know what the court has said about some dodgy academic practices that go toward this lawyers' picnic, and I want it to end, and I want it to end now.
Called. Order. Give the call to the member for Aston.
Yes. Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. How can Australian manufacturers help build more homes in Australia, creating more jobs with better pay? Are there different views about how this should be done?
Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Aston for the question and ongoing interest in this area, because ours is a government that's focusing on what matters to all Australians: getting a secure, well-paid job, being able to earn more and keep more of what you earn, being able to secure your own affordable, good quality home. And our government backs those aspirations through a future made in Australia, growing our industrial muscle, putting Australian know-how to work, creating new jobs, making more things here. And a great example of that, Speaker, is in the area of prefabricated or modular homes, which rely on advanced manufacturing techniques to help construct a home off-site, cutting construction time from a year down to just 12 weeks, delivering high-quality homes, cutting costs and creating jobs, and can help play a part in reaching our target of building 1.2 million new homes over 5 years. And to make it easier to do this, at Friday's Building Ministers meeting, all levels of government agreed to see how we can cut red tape to help build more of these homes quicker and more affordably. And as an aside, the Albanese government's tax cuts will mean a joiner in the construction industry on $85,000 a year, they're going to be $1,800 better off. So whether they're putting together prefab homes in a factory or installing them on site, Labor's tax cuts delivering for blue-collar workers. Now, I'm asked about whether or not there are different views. A lot on that side. A lot on that side. Always negative, always nasty, all the time. But they're celebrating an anniversary today. It was 10 years ago today when the Coalition brought in the idea of nights and days. Knights and Dames. As absurd as Monty Python's Knights who say nit, it's the Knights and Dames who say no.
Order. The member for Moreton will leave the chamber under 94A. Order. The member for Wannon on a point of order.
Well, Speaker, it's relevance. Australians can't find homes. There's a rental crisis.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. No, no. The member for Wannon, due to his seniority, gets a bit more licence than others, but he is what we call a serial offender of getting up and giving speeches. The point of relevance is to show that the minister isn't being relevant to the questions. It's not to then say a statement after. So you'll leave the chamber under 94A. So the minister was asked about homes. I'm just going to make sure he gets that he gets back to the topic. Character assessments are not part of the answer, so I'm just going to ask him to return to the question that he was asked.
Thanks, Speaker. So when we talked about building manufacturing capabilities in this country, they said no. When we talked about shielding manufacturers from the worst of energy price rises, they said no. And today, my personal favourite, the member for New England, the stalking horse you love the most, he was out there today saying manufacturing jobs had gone down, unburdened by facts and the weight of facts. That back never had to carry facts. He sort of ignoring the fact that nearly 90,000 manufacturing jobs created since we've come to office. And joining with our good friend, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, only ever talking about manufacturing to talk it down, described manufacturing as a graveyard, talking down manufacturing jobs, a complete rabble, not ready for government, and always, because they stand for nothing, they oppose everything.
The minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the member for Deakin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In the year to September 23, Labor's Big Australia has grown even bigger, with migration reaching a new record of 548,000. Yet only 173,000 new homes were built. When will this Prime Minister admit there's absolutely no chance his promised 1.2 million homes will ever be delivered? Why are Australians facing higher prices and fewer choices for housing because of this Prime Minister's failed housing and immigration policies?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, there's a lot to unpack in that question, Mr Speaker.
Order. The member for Deakin
well, you've asked
has
about
asked
five
the question.
in that period. So
order.
You've been here a while. You'll work it out eventually, Mr Speaker. The population statement of 2023 made it very clear. For 2030-31, the expected population is 600,000 people. Below that was what was projected prior to the onset of the pandemic in 2019-2020. So when his leader was the minister responsible, he had figures that would show it would be 600,000 more than what it will be as a result of this government's policy. But they
Order. The Prime Minister was referring to the December 2023 figures. Yep, the member will get the call. The Prime Minister will just pause. And it's 1 minute in, but we'll hear from the member for Deakin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The point of order is on relevance. My question referred to the official ABS data for the September 23 quarter and compared it to the number of homes being built. Now, the Prime Minister has not even attempted to answer the question, and I ask you, do you call him to be relevant?
If the Prime Minister is reading out figures regarding immigration, the figure was 548,000 in your question. He's just quoted a figure around 600,000, what the immigration figures will be for the next— wait, Member for Deakin, otherwise you won't hear what I'm about to say— for the next 10 years. It's impossible to argue that he's not being directly relevant to the question. Okay. So, yep, the member for. Yep. The member for Deakin on a point of order.
Have I got the call? Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the explanation. Speaking about numbers projected for 2030 cannot be relevant to my question. It just cannot be relevant.
Resume your seat. The Leader of the House.
Mr. Speaker, given understanding orders, only one point of order can be taken on the issue of relevance. I'm not sure what that was just then.
Yeah. So, the issue of relevance raises its head yet again. On practice, page 567, it clearly states it's been ruled that while a minister or a Prime Minister is addressing the policy topic, which is the subject of the question, the answer is directly relevant. So if the Prime Minister is talking about figures and he's contesting the figures, or he's adding additional figures to the topic, he is being directly relevant. The member for McEwen will leave the chamber under 94A. No one is to interject while we're dealing with issues. Order. Members on my left. So I appreciate the Shadow Minister would like a answer that he expects, but the Prime Minister, as long as he's being directly relevant to the topic under the standing orders, is within the stand. The Prime Minister will continue.
I'll try to remember the question, Mr. Speaker. Or questions. I know it's about migration, it was about housing. And on migration, it would have been bigger under them. That I know. And indeed, they complained that we weren't bringing enough people in. The Leader of the Opposition said this. In September 2022, we do need an increase in the migration numbers. It's clear that the number needs to be higher. That's what they had to say. When it comes to housing, we have comprehensive plans to build housing, all of which have been opposed by those opposite. Our Social Housing Accelerator, opposed by those opposite. The National Housing Supply and Affordability Council, opposed by those opposite. The National Housing Accord, opposed by those opposite. The Housing Australia Future Fund, opposed by those opposite. Providing additional financing to the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, opposed by those opposite. New incentives to increase build-to-rent, opposed by those opposite. Every single position put forward by the government is opposed by those opposite. The Shadow Treasurer can't get a question, so he just mouths off the rhetoric. But the fact is that those opposite have opposed all of the measures that we have put forward on housing. They left a migration system that was, in the words of Dr Parkinson, the former head of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet under those opposite, is so badly broken. It was a deliberate decision to neglect the system. And then the Nats leader, of course, has nailed it as well. We've got to acknowledge some of the challenges that we left behind. You've got to put your hand up. You've got to be honest with people. We didn't get it right in the fact that that backlog was there. Absolutely there was. It was a mess.
Talks now, member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government working with states, territories and local members to deliver reliable and affordable electricity, and what other approaches have been proposed?
To the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much. Well, the honourable member for Newcastle asked me in part about working with members of parliament, and she's a terrific one, Mr Speaker, an absolutely terrific one. And working with the states and territories is important as well. And our cooperation with states and territories is one of the reasons last year we saw a record 5.9 gigawatts of renewable energy installed into the grid, Mr Speaker. And it's also one of the reasons why the Investor Group of Climate Change today released figures showing that those investors citing regulatory uncertainty as a barrier to investment has dropped by 30 percentage points since we came to office. That's cooperation with the states and territories. And the same report showed out of 14 options for investing in energy in Australia, the most popular was renewable for investors and the least popular was nuclear energy, Mr Speaker. And the report said, and I quote, "This is due to nuclear energy's very high cost and lack of maturity and deployment in next-generation technologies." Now, I was asked by the honourable member for Newcastle about approaches that have been proposed, and of course we know that those opposite proposed nuclear. And the Leader of the Opposition said last week to his party room there were 4 problems: cost, safety, disposal and location. Now, we've just added a 5th, which is lack of investor certainty and lack of investor interest, and I can add a 6th, which is the states. Now, honourable members opposite, there's a ban. Yes, there is. There's a federal ban. What they don't talk about so much is there is also a ban on nuclear energy in the 3 mainland eastern states: Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. And recently we've seen leaders of the opposition leaders of the Liberal Party asked whether they'd lift the ban. Mr Crisafulli said, when he was asked if he supported the federal Liberal nuclear policy, "No, we don't." Mr Pizzuto said the ban can't be removed in the short term and won't be, Mr Speaker. So those opposite need to explain how they will overcome a ban in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. Now, I'm also asked about local members, and we've seen today 12 local members of great conviction say they fully support nuclear policy as long as it's not in their electorates, Mr Speaker. And I won't go through them all. The member for Hinkler said he had an interesting reason. "I have some technical restrictions that would make it unlikely. I don't have a power station, I don't have the infrastructure, and we have earthquakes." But my favourite was the member for Menzies, who said, "No reasonable person would suggest putting them right where people live." Now, Mr Speaker, so we're narrowing it down. It's going to be an electorate. It's going to be 6 electorates with a power station, infrastructure, no earthquakes and no people, Mr Speaker. Now, I know there's a redistribution coming, but I doubt it's going to produce 6 electorates with nobody living in them, Mr Speaker. That would be an unusual result for a redistribution. The sooner we get some detail from the opposition, the sooner their policy will fall apart.
Give a call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Toyota has said—
Order. Members on my right, I need to hear the question. The member for Hume will begin his question again.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Toyota has said Labor's new family car and ute tax will lead to price rises or companies rationalising their product offerings, and that it will have a huge impact on not just tradies but also farmers, families, remote area workers and many more. Why are Australian families facing higher prices and fewer choices because of this government's policies?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Hume for his question, but 77 minutes in for the Shadow Treasurer to get a question, and he doesn't put it to the Treasurer, Mr Speaker. And if I were the member for Hume, I'm not sure I would have asked about energy prices, Mr Speaker, or price rises, given the member for Hume signed a law to keep price rises secret before the last election. Signed a regulation, intervened to sign a regulation to keep price rises a secret until a week after people voted instead of a couple of weeks before. Now, that is something that is very much to the discredit of the member for Hume. Now, the member for Hume asked me about new vehicle efficiency standards. He was a member of a cabinet which endorsed the member for Bradfield and others going out and consulting on new vehicle efficiency standards, and then rolled the member for Bradfield and wouldn't let him implement it. We've taken the approach of consulting on the detailed design, as a good government should and would, consulting on the detailed policies. That's what we've been doing, as a consultative government would.
The Minister will pause. The Minister will pause. The Minister will pause. The member for Hume has been interjecting constantly. He's warned if he interjects once, he'll leave. Minister has the call.
That's what we've been doing, Mr Speaker, and I look forward to joining the Minister for Transport to announce the results of that consultation. It'll result in a better outcome for Australian consumers and motorists who've been grouped in with Russia for too long as the only motorists in the world without access to new vehicle efficiency standards.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. How will Labor's tax cuts benefit Australian women, and why is it important to have women in the room when governments make these decisions? What happens when women are not included?
Give the call to the order. Give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Canberra very much for her question and for her continuous advocacy for policies that benefit Australian women. In just a little over 3 months, Labor's tax cuts for all Australians will be delivered, helping with the cost of living for all taxpayers, but particularly for women. Our plan will see Australian women taxpayers on average receive a tax cut of $1,649 from the 1st of July, and it will see a bigger tax cut for 90% of Australian women taxpayers who will receive an additional average tax cut of $707. That's 5.8 million women receiving a bigger tax cut, and that matters. It matters that we have women in the room making those decisions to ensure that we have these policies that actually benefit Australia's women. That tax cut equates to a boost of over 630,000 additional hours per week worked by women. That is what happens when we sit around the cabinet table, when women are pre-selected and when they have a party room where women are in the majority. Delivering for women is in Labor's DNA. That's why we've delivered paid parental leave reforms. It's why we're so focused on closing the gender pay gap across Australia. It's why we want women's retirement income, making sure paid parental leave is paid, superannuation is paid on paid parental leave, so that women's retirement incomes are not affected by their time out of the workforce having children. These things matter. And all of these things are issues that the Liberal and National Party, frankly, have been absolutely incapable of doing. And you have to wonder, is that because of their inability to pre-select women and have women in the party room?
Order.
Senator Hume.
Do you think two's a big number?
Two's a big number. Two.
Do you think two's a big
The Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader on a point of order.
Point of order on relevance, Mr Speaker. The practice is clear. Ministers can be asked about matters within their own portfolio, not the affairs of political parties and not other political parties' actions or purported actions.
Order. Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, there's two sections of the standing orders. One goes to what can be asked and then what goes to what can be part of an answer. The Deputy Leader is correct when she says that those particular issues can't be part of the wording of a question. Once the question's asked, and this question had the final part, what happens when women are not included, the question then is the answer relevant to those words? And I'd put that what's being said by the Minister now is completely relevant to a question that was ruled in order.
The question contained what happens when women are not in the room, so I'm just going to make sure the Minister is being relevant rather than just an attack on any other party, to make sure she is within the standing orders.
So when women are not in the room, these decisions don't get made. And we had Senator Hume in her review of the Liberals' 2022 election campaign. She found that the Liberal Party has the lowest number of Liberal women in their parliamentary ranks since 1993. Yet when faced with the opportunity to do something about this, to pre-select a woman in the seat of Goldstein, currently held by a very strong and accomplished woman, guess what? They went for the same bloke who lost the seat last time. In South Australia, when given the choice between a female shadow cabinet member and a far-right conspiracy theorist, what do? They choose the conspiracy theorist. In Western Sydney, the Leader of the Opposition has had to come in.
The Minister will pause. We've already had one point of order on relevance. I'm just going to call the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, I simply seek your ruling as to whether the Minister, having heard your previous remarks and then departed completely into the territory that she just did, is in order with her answer. I seek your ruling.
Well, I'll just give the Minister one more chance because, order, she wasn't asked about any other parties in her question. She was asked about women in the room. So the remainder of her answer won't be about any other political party. It'll be about the importance, as she believes, of women in the room, not simply an attack on any other political party or any part of the chamber. She has the call.
seem to have a bit of a glass jaw about this issue, Mr Speaker. That's I wonder why.
Order.
I wonder why.
Order. Order. Members on my left, the member for Gippsland will cease interjecting. Order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I wonder why they are so sensitive about this issue. We on this side of the House know that it matters having women in the Cabinet room.
Order.
We know that it matters having women in our party room. We know that it matters having majority women in government, because that means the decisions that we make, paid parental leave, improving childcare, making sure we've got good retirement incomes for women, it matters when women are in the room.
Concluded. Call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Before members leave, I've assured